Dark August has been a concept in the book community for as many years as I've been a part of it. It's been different readathons, different challenges, different ways of tackling arcs have been run by various creators across various platforms. And this year is no different. I am going to be using the month of August to try and really tackle some of my NetGalley backlog. I am going to be taking part in one structured readathon run by Vanessa at Reads with Dr. B. She has a competitive readathon that is run through Discord. I'll link the announcement video below. However, I'm also going to be running some challenges of my own, some things I want to try to see if I can really focus down and prioritize on the arcs that I most want to get cleared off that shelf so I can focus on getting new ones. I've picked 5 books for this vlog and they are all very much backlist. Some of them go back more than 5 years and I don't remember much about them. I have the vaguest memories because obviously I read the descriptions when I requested them, but over the years I have lost a lot of the detail. They all have covers that I think look quite nice together, and I think we cover a spectrum from vampires to fairy tales to spies and some combinations within those. So the books that I will be looking at in this vlog are The Gilded Crown by Marianne, When They Beckon by Costales, The Hunter's Gambit by Ciel, The Beautiful by Renée, Ahdieh, and Creeping Beauty by Andrea. I've put together a little graphic on Canva and we're just going to cut that now. So here we have the 5 books that I am going to be using for this vlog, and I'm going to put them in order 1 through 5 in the kind of order that from the little I remember about them, I think I'm going to enjoy them, with 1 being the top book and 5 being the lowest. My rough thought here is that Creeping Beauty and The Gilded Crown I'm going to enjoy the least. I think Gilded Crown, Creeping Beauty, The Beautiful, and then I don't know much about either of these. I think maybe Hunter's Gambit might go there, and then When They Beckon would go there. I'm going to run this like a try a chapter meets a kind of knockout battle and read the first chapter in each of those books. Once I've read the first chapter, I will decide on the book that I am least interested in continuing with. Whether that is I'll come back to it later, or whether it's a true DNF. I'll let you know which book it is, and we will then reassess where I think the rankings are going to go before we go on and try chapter 2 in all of the remaining books. Okay, so we have some changes to make having just read chapter 1. What I'm going to do is we're going to quickly bounce those out of position, and the top book in that little section of first chapters, I think I'm going to put The Beautiful. Then we're going to say Hunter's Gambit. Then we're going to go Creeping Beauty, Gilded Crown, and When They Beckon, moving from 1st down to 5th. And so sadly, that becomes the first book that we have knocked out. Salome Visaya has nothing and no one. At least that's what the Alliance want her to think. A criminal organisation that has trained her since childhood, the Alliance made her a creature of cunning and greed, and now offers Salome a shot at the con of a lifetime. All she has to do is assume a secret identity, Rosalia de Loomis, and play the blushing bride-to-be. And the target? King Vincent Dolores of the war-ravaged Kingdom of Ilaria. 3 months to charm the king and the nobles, to weasel her way into his confidence, and to rob him and his treasury blind. It should be an easy job, the kind that she was born to play. But when a witch approaches her in the dark and awakens something inside her, everything changes. The court is alive with demons made of shadows, and Salome would be the only one with the power to save Ilaria and the world from the ancient forces that threaten them. So as you can see, I did change the order around quite a bit. The book that I decided to drop out after the first chapter was When We Beckon by Costales. This chapter opened with a young girl who is taken in by an organisation called the Alliance and essentially trained to become somewhere between an assassin and a spy. I very much got the sense of Arya from Game of Thrones when she was being trained under the many-faced god. In that chapter, we are quickly whittled through Salome's childhood and to the point where she has been trained up, she has been given a goal, she is to pretend to be a noblewoman, a specific noblewoman that is engaged to the current king. She is going to go to the palace and take part in the wedding in that woman's stead. It is a very cool premise. I love a political fantasy. I love these marriages where there is either a fake element to it or a forced element to it. I love when one character knows something the other doesn't. This on paper was one that I was really, really going to enjoy, but that first chapter was just far too by the numbers for me. As I said, we whistled through a lot of Salome's youth, but we also did it in a very detached way. It very, very much felt like a summary the author would write themselves that they would then flesh out. We are told this happened and this happened and this happened. And I got no sense of Salome as a character. I didn't feel like the writing choice I wanted for this type of story. I did read both the prologue and the first chapter in this one, but I just wasn't sold on this one. That writing style just wasn't going to work for me, and so that's the one I've dropped out of this round. So we are back, and we now need to decide the top 4 and which one is getting knocked out here. And I think we're going to be some movement again in this case. I'm gonna say the Hunter's Gambit is 1, the Beautiful is 2, the Gilded Crown is 3, and Creeping Beauty is coming in there at 4, which means we are losing Creeping Beauty in this round. Bitsy is no one's ideal princess. She's heard it all. That it's a shame she's so plain, so lacking in grace, that the best thing for her to do is simply wait, and then wait some more, and hope some prince will grant her a happy ending. Then Bitsy pricks her finger on a spindle and falls down, down, down. Into a world where cutthroats and con artists are more common than courtesies, where no one ages and everyone is beautiful, where an inscrutable evil rests at its core. A land where Bitsy's fate and her future are solely in her own hands, and neither are what she expects. The dark and deadly world of Heartless meets the empowering twists of Cruel Beauty in this thrilling, unpredictable, multi-genre retelling of one of the most beloved fairy tales, where instead of falling asleep to await her prince, this Sleeping Beauty finally wakes up. So there was another little bit of movement here, not quite as much as the first time, but a little. And the book that we got rid of was Creeping Beauty by Andrea Portes. In the first chapter, we had Bitsy, who is, I thought, a very young princess. She's having a conversation with her mother and her lady's maids about starting to consider marriage. She very much doesn't want to get married, but is told point blank that if you don't get married, then you are a person of no worth. Very specifically, no worth. Once we got into the second chapter, though, I found out she wasn't as young as I thought because that potential marriage is incredibly imminent. We had her with her cousins who she dislikes, and they just were mocking her, and she didn't stand up for herself at all. Everyone in this world, the maidservants, the mother, the cousins, everyone, and Bitsy herself is very, 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 very keen to point out to us that she is plain, and it is the worst crime in the world she can commit. Her mother is beautiful, other people are attractive, Bitsy is plain. Her cousins really harp on about this, and they mock her for reading, they mock her for trying to improve her mind. They do point out that, like, specifically with her tutor, she's been looking at maps, and they tell her that this will have no use in her future as a queen, which felt very much like you want to paint these as mean girls as quickly as possible, because I cannot imagine a world where, like, the king and queen wouldn't need to have at least the vaguest idea of the layout of their world, of the borders of countries, if the ambassador you're talking to is in a country or a city that borders with your allies or your enemies. Of course, that's something she would be expected to know. But because obviously everyone's so mean to Bitsy, they mock her for this. Other than that, nothing happened. And then, because I was feeling generous, I started chapter 3 just to try and see when the plot would kick off. And from what I got, it's going to be a kind of Sleeping Beauty because there's to do with the spindle, but also Alice in Wonderland. She does this is to get away from the suitor that her parents have kind of left her to deal with. And the fat phobia about this man was pretty high. So that wasn't why I would pick this one to DNF. The reason I picked this one to DNF is that Bitsy's insufferable, and so is everyone else in the world. But I was holding out hope that maybe the author was doing something with that. Characters that weren't Bitsy, characters around her, all felt like very much parodies, almost satirical. And I did wonder if we were doing something quite smart in setting that up to be some kind of commentary on the fairy tale aspect and the marriage aspect and expectations. But I don't think we are. And so, unfortunately, I am also going to be DNFing Creeping Beauty, which leaves us with a top 3. And I'll get back to you on which one doesn't make the cut to the final 2.
So this is the first round where I have really, really struggled to narrow it down to which one I want to leave at the bottom. I genuinely think if I was picking up each one of these books, I would want to carry on with it past the point I'm at. I wouldn't be ready to put any of them down yet. From where I am in all of them, I genuinely think I would probably want to see all of them through to the end, and I probably will. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to go with the books that I am the most excited to continue. So the top book is actually The Gilded Crown. Then this has been a really heart-wrenching decision. I have ummed and ahed over it, but I'm gonna put The Beautiful in number 2, and Hunter's Gambit, sadly, is in number 3 and getting knocked out. From the award-nominated author of Bluebird comes a riveting, spicy fantasy featuring malevolent vampires and a locked room escape adventure, perfect for fans of Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. The city of Mazavim is plagued by aristocratic vampires who terrorize the human citizens, but Kazan Korvik refuses to cower. As an expert blacksmith with a sharp grifter's eye, her speciality lies in crafting and using weapons designed to kill the vicious creatures. But it turns out sword skills aren't quite enough when a whole group of vampires attack her and steal her magical weapon. Kazan is captured and forced to attend the vampire court, where she is forced to act as their queen. For 3 days she will be waited and doted upon, until the lavish party where her reign will end in an extravagant feast, with Kazan as the main course. Kazan plans to find her sword and get out, except with no allies in the castle, Kazan can feel the walls closing in. But she soon realizes that she is not just trapped with these bloodthirsty bastards, they're trapped with her too. And they're not prepared for just how far she's willing to go to survive.
So this was probably the first of these picks that has actually genuinely been really, really hard. I decided to drop The Hunter's Gambit. This was definitely the hardest choice of the 3. All 3 books here in this section are really, really good, solid stories, and I could definitely see myself continuing with any of them. My kind of reasoning behind dropping this one now is that my interest in them is growing. While I feel like my interest in this book, The Hunter's Gambit, it was peaked right at the start. That first chapter, or the first couple of chapters, were so intriguing, and I feel like my interest is based largely on those early chapters, despite what's happened in the last one, rather than because of. And because I did struggle with this choice so much, I actually read an extra chapter in all of these books. And as I said, I think what's happening is that initial surge of interest is carrying me through, but I'm not feeling compelled by the current chapters to read on. So because that's kind of, my interest is slightly waning on this one, whereas it's rising on the others, I feel it's got to be the other 2 that I continue with. It does leave us on a vampires versus necromancers face-off, which feels like quite a nice way to be going into this final round.
So here is our final battle, and this is a really, really tough choice. I thought the last choice was really difficult, but this has been really, really difficult. And I honestly think I am going to continue with both these books no matter what. I definitely need to know what happens in both of them. But I think at the moment, the one I am most interested in continuing with is The Gilded Crown. which means the beautiful goes there. And yeah, I think we are dropping the beautiful this round. So, kind of Scandinavian necromancers are the book I'll be continuing with. In 1872, New Orleans is a city ruled by the dead. But to 17-year-old Céline Rousseau, New Orleans provides her with a refuge after she's forced to flee her life as a dressmaker in Paris. Taken in by the sisters of the Ursuline convent along with 6 other girls, Céline quickly becomes enamored with the vibrant city, from the music to the food to the soirees, and, especially, to the danger. She soon becomes embroiled in the city's glitzy underworld, known as La Cour des Lions, after catching the eye of the group's leader, the enigmatic Sébastien Saint-Germain. When the body of one of the girls from the convent is found in the lair of La Cour des Lions, Céline battles her attraction to him and suspicions about Sébastien's guilt, along with the shame of her own horrible secret. When more bodies are discovered, each crime more gruesome than the last, Céline and New Orleans become gripped by the terror of a serial killer on the loose, one Céline is sure has set her in his sights, and who may even be the young man who has stolen her heart. As the murders continue to go unsolved, Céline takes matters into her own hands, and soon uncovers something even more shocking. An age-old feud from the darkest creatures of the underworld reveals a truth about Céline she has always suspected simmered just beneath the surface. At once a sultry romance and a thrilling murder mystery, master storyteller Renée Ahdieh embarks on her most potent fantasy series yet, The Beautiful.
So I realised that I probably should have told you a little bit more about The Beautiful before I just gave my reasons for putting it down. As I said right from the start, the writing in this one was really beautiful. I think Renée Ahdieh has a really lyrical writing style, and that definitely comes through in this book in a way that really suits the topic, the theme. This is a book about vampires in New Orleans. It's very dark and lush and very atmospheric, all of which completely suits that really lyrical writing style. Our book opens with Céline and Piper on a boat heading towards New Orleans. They are on a boat with a bunch of other girls, and they all seem to have come from different places. We have Céline, who is French, Piper is English, we have a Scottish girl, and they're all on their way to New Orleans, I think, to join some kind of convent. In the book, as far as I got, there were some kind of hints of there was an altercation with a kind of nameless girl in a back alley, with her being attacked by what I have to assume is going to be one of the vampires. And then we have the girls arrive in New Orleans, they become part of the kind of convent and are selling embroidered handkerchiefs to kind of earn some money. And Céline is approached by a wealthy woman who recognises her French fashion sense, recognises her skill with the needle, and wants to hire her to kind of work directly for her as a dressmaker. And that's about as far as I got. There were no real vampires happening, but there was definitely a lot of build up, there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of atmosphere. I am going to be continuing this book. If nothing else, I think that that little hint of Céline's dressmaking ability counts for the R fantasy square about a book with fashion. I'm hoping it's going to carry through, but if nothing else, it was a really compelling, inciting incident that brought these two characters together, and I am going to assume that those two characters are going to be very influential in the plot. So I'm going to be setting it aside for now, but I actually might be doing a buddy read of it in October, which I will let you know more about if that does go ahead. But potentially I'll be reading it with B at Just Be Weird. I'll link to her channel below, and you can keep an eye out in the future to see if we do actually read this backlist arc together. The book that I am going to be continuing with though is The Gilded Crown. So again, I feel I should probably update you a little bit on where we are with that one before continuing the vlog.
Witch's heart meets the Priory of the Orange Tree in this debut novel about a woman who can bring people back from the dead, and the princess, the only heir to the throne, that she must protect no matter the cost. The first time Helivere visited death, she was 10 years old. Since she was a little girl, Helivere has been able to raise the dead. Every creature can be saved for a price demanded by the shrouded figure who rules the afterlife, who takes a little more from Helivere with each soul she resurrects. Such a gift can rarely remain a secret. When Princess Sullivan, sole heir to the kingdom's throne, is assassinated, the queen summons Helivere to demand she bring her granddaughter back to life. But once is not enough. The killers might strike again. The princess's death would cause a civil war, so the queen commands that Hellivier remain by her side. But Sulivain is no easy woman to be bound to, even as Hellivier begins to fall in love with her. With the threat of war looming, Hellivier must trade more and more of herself to keep the princess alive. But death will always take what he is owed.
So in that opening chapter, we have Hellivier as a little girl, and I really wasn't sure about that opening chapter. The writing style is a little disjointed, it's a little dreamy, it had a very kind of fairy tale-esque feel to it that I personally just wasn't vibing with. But I actually think that's because we are seeing Hellivier as a really young child, and that's that sort of fuzzy memory aspect coming through, which on reflection I really like. I think it's really hard to write a book where you start with the protagonist as a young child in their head, in their point of view. It's not a middle grade book, it's not a picture book. The book isn't for children, so it's hard to make an adult reader engage in the voice of a child. I really recently read Blood of Olympus, which does something similar. We start out with a chapter or two where the protagonist is about 10, and I really struggled because I could not accept in my head that this was the voice of a 10-year-old telling me this story. So, although I wasn't a massive fan of the chapter in here, I can see the point it served, and I do think it actually did what it was trying to do really well, because as we move forward in the book and Hellivier grew up to the protagonist she becomes round about, I don't know, maybe the chapter 3, the voice fit a lot better. It felt more just like a natural writing style, and it was very distinct from that young, slightly detached memory of Hellivier's childhood. So in that opening chapter, she brings a fox back to life, and she talks to the kind of spirits in the hearth. Her mother dies in childbirth, and Hellivier is able to cross over to the land of the dead and make some sacrifices of her own. She gives up a finger and some hair, and the god of death, or death, allows her to choose between bringing her mother back and bringing her sibling back. She chooses her mother, and her mother holds it against her. So her mother takes the family, minus Hellivier, away to the city and leaves Hellivier with the village's local herb woman, or wise woman. And then we jump to Hellivier as an adult. She's now, I think, in her 20s in this book. And the queen turns up on their doorstep because her granddaughter has been assassinated. She brings the body, and she wants the wise woman to bring her back because she's heard she can do that. She refuses. She says she doesn't have the power anymore, but Hellivier steps in and she brings the princess back to life. They make a deal that this is the only time it's going to happen. She won't be harassed by the court, and we go back to their lives. But in the village, they are now aware of her power and they resent her for it. They resent her for the people in the village that she hasn't saved. And obviously, as we've seen, it exacts a price from her. She can't go about saving everyone. Luckily or unluckily, a summons comes from the city and Hellivier is called to the princess's side. The princess wants to know what happened, and we have to assume potentially make more use of this power. So Hellivier has moved to the city, and at the point I'm at, I think we're around about the 20% mark. She has just been essentially drafted into the princess's service, and she's doing a bit of exploring around the city while living with her mother, father, and brother. What I'm finding really interesting at this point in terms of world building is that Hellivier follows her father's religion, which feels like an old Slavic religion with spirits of the hearth, the fire, things like that. And then we have her mother's religion, which is the prevalent kind of upcoming religion in the city. It's the religion that the royal family follows. And it feels a lot more along the lines of something like Christianity. It has been an oral history in the past, but it's becoming something that's more written down. It seems to have a little bit more of a structured feel to it. There's the aesthetics of this big city are really beautiful, especially in contrast to the village Hellivier's came from, that really rural kind of community. There's a nice contrast in the kind of imagery in the book. At the moment, I would say that if I had to pitch this as something, it would maybe be that The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, with hints of T. Kingfisher's work coming through in the slightly darker aspects. The having to give up the fingers for the spells to work. She has a raven kind of sidekick now that another creature she brought back from death. And we have a kind of complicated relationship between Hellivier and death itself. She sees him as a human man when she goes through to the world, but I'm not entirely certain whether he's a friend, he's known her since childhood, whether he is looking out for her best interests or whether he's using her, whether there's a potential romance there, I don't know. I've been trying not to look too closely at the reviews of this one, but I did skim some, and the overall Goodreads rating isn't good for this one. It's, I think, maybe potentially the worst Goodreads rating of the 5 books I picked. But from what I'm getting through, I think it might be a case of mismatched expectations. I think people thought they were getting something different from this book than what they have. And the title, The Gilded Crown, doesn't feel like a title that goes with the book where I am so far. And the cover image doesn't feel like the cover for this book that I'm reading at the moment. Obviously, there can be plot developments, and both titles and books, it could be referring to the next 75% of the novel. But I think if I was to pick up this book from a shelf, what I have so far read wouldn't be what I would have expected. So if that is the cause of those kind of negative ratings, and I'm having a good time with the book where I am, then in theory this should actually be a really good read for me. Because if it doesn't match those expectations, that's fine, I know that. So I do have high hopes here. And I think the problem might have been that it was expected to be more of a romantasy than it is. I've said 1,000 times I'm not a big romantasy reader, though I'm trying to kind of dip my toe in a bit more. But honestly, if it falls more along the lines of a fantasy with a romance, or a fantasy with complicated relationships, or more politics than romance, all of that would be fine with me because I really don't have a preference for romantasy. So I'm going to keep reading, and I'll let you know how I get on, maybe round about the halfway mark or towards the kind of the end of the second act. I'm just over the 50% mark in The Gilded Crown, and I'm still having a great time with it. At this point in the book, the story is kind of split in 3 different ways. Hellivier has been tasked by Death, the god of death, the gatekeeper of death. We still don't entirely know who he is, but she has been tasked by him to find various treasures. He gives her riddles, she goes on little quests to different locations and finds they're generally overlooked things. She gets seeds from a willow tree, she gets pearls from a sea cave. And these treasures are things that she'll be able to use instead of parts of herself to revive the dead. So she wants to fulfill these quests so that she's got a bit of a backlog in her arsenal, so that if something happens to Sullivan or someone else, Hellivier will be able to revive as many people as possible without kind of eating into her own soul too deeply. This gives the book a kind of questy fantasy element that keeps the rest of it moving. It's a nice way of giving us some structure in this middle section of the story. Then we have the politics, which I would say is probably the biggest, meatiest part. This is obviously to do with Hellivier finding her place in the city. She's spending a lot of time with various courtiers. Her brother is a squire. Sullivan obviously is the princess. The queen is there. We're getting to know a little bit more about the politics of the city and of this world. At the same time, and mixed in with that, is the fact that Hellivier is trying to solve a kind of murder mystery. She's trying to find out who assassinated Sullivan in the first place. Their romance is starting to build. There's clearly an attraction between the two of them, and all those factors kind of building together in the kind of courtly sphere of the story. Running alongside the politics is religion. As I said, the story has 2 religions. One is older, one is newer to the city. One feels vaguely pagan coded, one feels quite Christianity coded. And these 2 religions are butting up against each other, both in a kind of city-wide scale, in that this newer religion is coming in. They've become the royal family's religion. They are taking over. They're being seen as kind of the true religion. Personally, the aspects I'm enjoying the most are the little quests. They tend to be quite short. She gets a little riddle, she goes off on an adventure, she returns with something, and almost immediately has to use it. So the actual benefit of stockpiling these doesn't ever really seem to come to fruition. But I'm also enjoying the kind of courtly aspect. I think I knew I would. I tend to enjoy politics in my books. I'm enjoying seeing the different political families, the way the court is structured. I'm intrigued by romance. When I was looking at those Goodreads reviews, it seemed like a lot of the negative reviews, a lot of the lower reviews, were that they had essentially been missold this as a romantasy. So obviously the romance angle is important, but I wouldn't say it's super romantic so far. There's definitely a connection between the two women. There's definitely, like I said, an attraction there, but also a complicated dynamic where I don't think either of them knows fully whether this compulsion, this draw to each other, is based on kind of romantic attraction or whether it's something to do with the fact that Helivir's soul was involved in bringing Sullivan back to life. And I think both of them have their doubts about that. It makes their relationship really convoluted and really interesting, but it's very, very much a slow burn. I'm not entirely certain we're ever going to get to a point where we get a traditional romance from the two of them, but I am really interested to see how it plays out. So I just finished the Gilded Crown and I am so happy with the way this vlog turned out. These were 5 books that honestly all of which I had completely forgotten about, and I was really expecting to DNF most if not all of them. Instead, I found at least one book I definitely want to go back to. I'm going to be reading The Beautiful in October. But also, I actually found a 5-star read. Specifically, I found a 5-star read in one of the books of those 5 that I was the least expecting to enjoy. I'm not 100% sure that I will stick with a 5-star rating for this one in a few days, somewhere closer to a 4.5. But at the moment, it definitely feels like the full 5 to me, and I'm really, really excited to read the sequel. This is a dark political fantasy with a romantic, toxic relationship subplot. It's definitely not a romantasy, and I think that's where the book's biggest problem has lain in terms of marketing and finding its audience. When I scrolled through Goodreads, it had a lot of 5-star reviews, it had a lot of 5s, a lot of 4s, but when we hit those low numbers, those 2s, even those 1s, the vast majority of the complaints that had something specific to say other than, this just didn't work for me or whatever, were that they had been expecting something romantic, they had been expecting the romance to play a bigger part, they hadn't been expecting this kind of toxic relationship. And I think that's what's really let the book down, has been expectations rather than a flaw in the book itself. Disappointingly, what I think is probably to blame for that is largely the fact that when this came out, and still, there's currently a kind of trend for a woman writing fantasy equals romantasy, the same way that 10 years ago a woman writing fantasy was automatically labelled as YA. Even some of those books on very, very adult topics, still to this day I spot in the YA section of libraries or bookstores. And I think that's a current problem we're having. I also hate to say it, but I think the cover design might be partly at fault. It is a really, really beautiful cover, but with a couple of alterations, I think it could fit the tone of the book so much better. If we took off that really bright, colourful crown on the top and flipped the image round, giving you that darker crown that's already underneath, and just let that take up the cover of the book, I think this, which took me about 30 seconds in Canva, gives a much stronger impression of the tone of the book than what it currently has. And I just think that's probably set people in the wrong direction, affecting the ratings, and then it's been a bit of a spiral. I do think this is an excellent book, but you have to know what you're getting. Now, the one thing that is making me think I might lower the rating by a scooch on reflection is just that the book felt a little bit long for what it is, for its page count. It sits, according to Google, about 380 something. I think you could scooch that down just a little bit because there's a little part in the middle which just slows down a touch and the pacing just feels a little bit off there. But that's a very, very minor complaint, and other than that, I was riveted throughout the entire book. One of my favourite elements of this book was the kind of 3-way dynamic, or the, I guess, dual dynamic between Helivir and Sullivan and the Death character. Interestingly enough, if you were in there for romantasy, those are probably the 3 characters you're most interested in anyway, but taking out the romantic aspect, The dynamic between those three was so interesting. The way Sullivan and Death were kind of pulling Helliver in different directions, bringing out different sides of her. On the one hand, we have this obsessive compulsion between her and Sullivan. They definitely are attracted to each other, they're drawn to each other, but they can't really trust how much of that feeling comes from the sharing of their souls or how much of it is a kind of genuine attraction. Sullivan points out towards the end that if things had been different, they could have been friends. And Helliver says something along the lines of, yes, in another world. And I think that's what's interesting between them, is you don't know what's actually compelling the two of them to find each other. There's also all these elements, the toxic aspect of that relationship, where Sullivan is blackmailing Helliver right from the very start. She is being compelled to do the work for this royal family. And as the book goes on, more and more, she is being forced to do these things against her wishes, to her detriment, under threat of her family's livelihood, her freedom, and ultimately their lives. But despite all this, she can't cut ties with Sullivan. She can't draw away from her. In that last meeting they have right at the end of the book, you can still see the connection between them. I still at that point was rooting for them. I still am, despite everything. And I think that's a really nice place to leave this first half of the duology, because I'm fascinated in the second part, which direction that relationship is going to go. Whether we are going to go down a route of them kind of finding some kind of romantic or even just like platonic conclusion, or whether we are going to splinter off and they're going to become even more embittered by each other as the politics takes hold. On the flip side, we have Helliver's relationship with Death. Obviously, there's a kind of element of fear involved there. He is a god, there's a supplicant deity relationship, but there's also a really, I want to say paternal relationship there, or possibly as Helliver and her mother really don't get on, it could be a maternal relationship. And you do get moments where you really think that Death, or the gatekeeper, or whatever we're calling him, wants what's best for Helliver. He's looking out for her. He tells her to stop doing these raisings of Sullivan, that they're getting too tied up in each other. He warns her that she's going to lose more and more of herself. What happens when there's nothing of her left? What happens when there's more of her in Sullivan than there is in herself? He definitely seems to be looking out for her. But in the moments where she angers him, we also see that he is this powerful being. He doesn't consider her an equal. She has to do what he tells her. And we also then see his kind of rage towards Sullivan building throughout the novel, as he is denied the person that has been meant to have died multiple times and been taken from him by Helliver. So they have this really complicated relationship between the three of them that is really, really interesting to watch evolve. And then at the end, we get some kind of revelations about who Death, the gatekeeper, might also be, another one of his personalities, which ties him back around to Sullivan's family even more tightly. And again, I think that's going to be something that's going to play out really, really interestingly in the next book. Helliver's journey on her own, in herself, was also really fascinating. Over the course of the novel, we see her, especially in that last quarter maybe, we see her become so much more comfortable in Death's realm. And not just comfortable in Death's realm, but more comfortable there than she actually is in life, in the world, in the life that she's living. Everything's, as obviously the finale of a book, everything's going wrong, nothing's going her way, and she finds it easier and easier to use her stepping into Death abilities just to not be present in the dilemmas, the grief, the moral conundrums that she's facing in life. We also see her more and more making choices about Death, making choices about whose life is worth more, who to save. At the beginning, she's very much that anyone that comes to her, she wants to save, she wants to help, she wants to give. As the book goes on, we talk about the fact that the raisings are costing her. They're both from her, originally from her body, losing the fingers, then these like precious gifts that Death has been sending her to find, and throughout obviously from her own soul. And it is interesting to watch as she goes along, when she hits that point, when she starts to decide, yeah, but if I save this person, I can't save that person. Or if I save this person, I'm going to lose more of myself than I'm really willing to give. And potentially I can save more people in the future than this one life. It's really interesting to see her go on that journey as the kind of the stakes raise, the raisings become more personal, but she also, I think, there's a kind of moral, not decay, but definitely something to do with her becoming more detached in the way that death is. So, yeah, this is definitely at least a 4.5, possibly even a 5, and I am 100% hooked on reading the sequel, which I'll pop here. I think Marianne Gordon has done something really original with this book. It's one I keep, it's been a couple of days, and it's one I kind of keep coming back to, keep thinking about. I love how we do start off with quite an idealistic character, and over the course of the book, she becomes more pragmatic. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a corruption arc, but it's definitely something along those lines. It compels you to question what you would do in her place. I love the fact that that romance, if we're calling it that, isn't romantic. I love the fact that it's that kind of toxic compulsion, but we didn't need to go down like the shadow daddy route. Sullivan's a horrible person, but you can also understand her. You can also kind of see how she got where she is. You can see the sparks of something better in her. And I'm really interested to see how Sullivan changes. I wonder in the second book whether Sullivan will actually take the throne, and then we'll be forced maybe to see how much of these choices, how much of these decisions, how much of this darkness is actually due to her and how much of it is her grandmother. I have loads and loads of questions, and I'm really excited to see how they all play out. As I said, I think it's a really original book just because of having that the dynamic between Helliver and Sullivan is so different from anything I've seen. It's kind of unflinching in that it is going full dark political fantasy, while keeping quite a kind of actiony pace in the fact that you have those quests from death. So for my arc knockout, I definitely have had a brilliant success. I've got 5 books that I now know whether I want to read or not. I have 2 books that I was able to try, figure out that they weren't for me, and DNF pretty quickly. I got a fair sense of The Hunter's Gambit, and I do think I might pick that one up in future again. The Beautiful, I'm definitely going to be reading the entire book, and obviously I found a potentially 5-star read. So a really, really broad spectrum, but a really nice outcome. If you have enjoyed this kind of type of vlog, seeing me decide on different books as I go, then let me know. It's definitely something that, with the state of my NetGalley shelf, I could do again. If you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, I really appreciate that. And if you don't have anything in particular that you want to say, but you'd like to leave a comment, then just leave me a crown emoji. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. I've had a great time with it, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.